Welcome to this lecture on the hormonal regulation of gestation. If you have ever wondered how a tiny, newly formed embryo manages to survive and grow into a fully developed baby, the answer lies in a beautifully orchestrated symphony of chemical signals. Today, we are going to explore exactly how the maternal body and the developing fetus communicate to maintain a healthy pregnancy. We will look at the biology behind it, the clinical applications, and even the mathematics used by doctors to monitor early fetal development. Let us dive in. Now that we have introduced our topic, let us start with an intuitive analogy to understand how this complex biological process works. Imagine you are launching a massive space shuttle into orbit. The initial booster rockets provide the massive thrust needed to get off the ground, but they eventually run out of fuel and detach. At that exact moment, the shuttle's main engines must ignite and take over to sustain the journey into space. In human reproduction, a pregnancy operates on the exact same principle of a critical handover. The maternal ovary acts as the initial booster rocket, producing hormones to keep the pregnancy alive in the first few weeks. Eventually, a brand new temporary organ called the placenta grows and takes over as the main engine. Moving from our analogy to the formal biology, let us look at the specific chemicals driving this process. Formally, the hormonal regulation of gestation refers to the synchronized secretion and action of specific endocrine hormones required to maintain a pregnancy. The primary hormones involved are human chorionic gonadotropin, commonly abbreviated as HCG, alongside progesterone and estrogen. Initially, the early embryo secretes HCG to rescue the corpus luteum in the ovary, forcing it to continue producing progesterone instead of degrading. Progesterone is the absolute master hormone of pregnancy. It is directly responsible for keeping the uterine muscle relaxed and ensuring the uterine lining remains thick and nutrient-rich to support the growing fetus. Understanding the role of these early hormones brings us to the most critical transition point in a pregnancy. Around the 8th to 12th week of gestation, a vital event called the luteal placental shift occurs. This is the exact moment our biological space shuttle drops its booster rockets. During this shift, the placenta becomes fully mature and takes over the massive daily production of progesterone and estrogen. Because the placenta is now capable of sustaining the pregnancy on its own, the corpus luteum in the ovary is no longer needed and is finally allowed to degrade. This seamless transition is essential for the fetus to survive the remainder of the gestation period. Now that we know how the biological handover works, we must ask why this matters in modern medicine. Understanding this hormonal cascade is absolutely critical for clinical practice. Without this precise sequence, the maternal immune system would attack the fetus, or the uterine lining would shed, resulting in an immediate miscarriage. In the real world, this biology is how home pregnancy tests work. They use antibodies to detect the presence of HCG in the mother's urine. Furthermore, obstetricians closely monitor these hormone levels in the blood during the first trimester. If a patient has a history of early miscarriages, doctors will often prescribe supplemental progesterone to artificially support the pregnancy until the placenta can safely take over. Because monitoring these hormones is so critical, doctors rely heavily on mathematical models to evaluate the health of an early pregnancy. In a healthy early gestation, the concentration of HCG grows exponentially, doubling at a highly predictable rate. We model this using a standard biological doubling formula. Let us break down the symbols. C of T represents the concentration of the hormone at a specific time. usually measured in milli-international units per milliliter. C0 stands for the initial concentration when the first blood test was taken. The variable T represents the total time elapsed between tests in days. Finally, D represents the doubling time. If the doubling time D increases significantly beyond 2 or 3 days, it means hormone levels are rising too slowly, which is a strong clinical warning sign. Before we move on to more complex scenarios, let us see this formula in action with a concrete example. A pregnant patient comes into the clinic, and her initial HCG concentration is measured at 150 milli-international units per milliliter. Her doctor schedules a follow-up in 4 days. Assuming a healthy pregnancy with a standard doubling time of 2 days, what should her expected concentration be? We start by identifying our knowns. Initial concentration is 150, time is 4, and doubling time is 2. We substitute these into our exponential growth equation. Dividing the time by the doubling time gives us an exponent of 2. 2 squared is 4. Multiplying 150 by 4 gives us 600. Physically, this tells the doctor the embryo is growing rapidly and establishing early placental connections. Now that we have used the formula to predict future levels, let us look at a scenario where we must work backwards to assess viability. Another patient has her blood drawn on Monday, showing an initial HCG level of 500. She returns exactly 4 days later, and her new level is 1,000. We need to calculate the doubling time to determine if the pregnancy is progressing normally. This is a common clinical scenario when a patient experiences early pregnancy spotting. We are given the initial concentration, the final concentration, and the elapsed time. We plug all these known values into our standard exponential equation. This leaves us with an equation where the doubling time, D, is trapped in the exponent. We must now use algebra to isolate and solve for it. To solve the equation we just set up, we need to carefully isolate our unknown variable. This chunk of our mathematical derivation focuses on getting the exponential term by itself. We start with our populated equation, 1,000 equals 500 times 2 to the power of 4 over d. The first algebraic step in these problems is always to remove the coefficient from the exponential term. We do this by dividing both sides of the equation by the initial concentration of 500. 1,000 divided by 500 simplifies perfectly to exactly 2. This leaves us with a clean equation. 2 equals 2 to the power of 4 over d. By isolating the base, we have set ourselves up to directly compare the exponents in the next step. Continuing from our isolated exponential term, we can now find our final result. We have the equation 2 equals 2 to the power of 4 over d. The number 2 on the left side has an implied exponent of 1. Because the base on both sides of the equal sign is exactly the same, the number 2, mathematical rules allow us to directly equate their exponents. So we set 1 equal to the fraction 4 over d. Solving for our unknown variable is now trivial. We simply multiply both sides by d, giving us a doubling time of 4 days. Clinically, this 4-day doubling time is significantly slower than the healthy benchmark of 2 days. This slow rise alerts the physician that the pregnancy may be failing, proving how this simple derivation directly guides medical decisions. Having proven how we calculate hormone growth, let us visualize the entire gestational timeline. What you are looking at is a graph tracking the 3 major hormones over 40 weeks of gestation. The horizontal axis represents time in weeks, and the vertical axis represents relative hormone concentration. Notice the blue curve representing HCG. It spikes dramatically in the first few weeks. This is the embryo rescuing the corpus luteum. But look at the vertical dashed line at week 10, labeled the luteal placental shift. Right as HCG peaks and begins to drop, the green and red curves for progesterone and estrogen begin their massive, steady climb. This visualizes the exact moment the placenta matures and takes over the heavy lifting, allowing the pregnancy to continue safely until birth. We have covered a lot of ground today, so let us summarize the key takeaways. First, remember that the hormonal regulation of gestation is essentially a beautifully orchestrated relay race. The early embryo uses HCG to signal its presence, acting as the initial booster rocket to keep the ovarian progesterone factory running. Second, the most critical milestone is the luteal placental shift, where the mature placenta takes over the heavy lifting to nurture the fetus until birth. Finally, we saw how understanding the exponential mathematical growth patterns of these hormones is just as important as the biology, giving doctors the tools to monitor and protect human life in its earliest stages. You now have a comprehensive understanding of gestational hormones.